In a move that stunned the world and sent shockwaves through diplomatic circles, the United States has imposed sweeping sanctions on Colombia's sitting president, Gustavo Petro, a rare and dramatic step against a longtime ally. Never before has Washington targeted a democratically elected leader of Colombia with such force, raising urgent questions about the future of U.S.-Latin American relations and the stability of the region. The sanctions freeze all U.S.-based assets of Petro, his family, and key cabinet members, and ban Americans from doing business with them. Overnight, their financial lifelines have been severed, leaving them cut off from international banking, investments, and even basic transactions. For Petro's inner circle, the impact is immediate and personal. Bank accounts locked, properties in limbo, and travel plans abruptly cancelled. This marks a sharp escalation in U.S.-Colombia tensions, effectively isolating Petro from the global financial system. The message from Washington is clear. There are consequences for defying U.S. interests, and no one is untouchable, not even a sitting president. For decades, Colombia was America's closest partner in Latin America, especially in the war on drugs. Billions of dollars in aid, military cooperation, and intelligence sharing cemented a relationship that shaped the region's security landscape. Now, that alliance is in tatters. The trust built over generations has been shattered, replaced by suspicion and public recriminations. Diplomatic channels that once buzzed with activity now echo with silence. The U.S., under a hardline administration, is cracking down on drug trafficking. Officials in Washington argue that Colombia's new policies have undermined years of progress, fueling a surge in narcotics flowing north. Petro, Colombia's first leftist president, promised a new approach to peace and social justice. He vowed to address the root causes of violence, invest in marginalized communities, and negotiate with armed groups, an agenda that challenged the status quo. The clash is about more than politics. It's a battle of visions, with millions of lives caught in the crossfire. Ordinary Colombians now face uncertainty as protests erupt and families worry about the future of their country. Petro, a former guerrilla, now faces the ultimate test of leadership as his country is thrust into crisis. Every decision he makes will shape Colombia's destiny and determine whether he can weather the storm or be swept away by it. The breakdown of trust has turned a historic partnership into open rivalry. Negotiations have stalled, and both sides are digging in, unwilling to compromise or back down. The world is left to wonder, can these nations step back from the brink, or is this the dawn of a new era of confrontation? As global leaders watch anxiously, the fate of U.S.-Colombia relations hangs in the balance, with consequences that could ripple far beyond their borders. The U.S. claims its sweeping sanctions are a direct response to record-breaking cocaine production in Colombia since President Gustavo Petro assumed office. American officials argue that the explosion in coca cultivation has reached unprecedented levels, threatening not only Colombia's stability, but also fueling a surge of narcotics into American cities and communities. Washington blames Petro's approach to drug policy, seen as too lenient and reformist, for emboldening coca growers and traffickers. Critics in the U.S. say his government's shift away from forced eradication has allowed criminal networks to thrive, making Colombia once again the epicenter of the global cocaine trade. Former President Trump, now back in power, has taken a hardline stance. He's publicly labeled Petro a thug and Colombia a drug den, using stark language that signals a new era of confrontation between the two countries. Trump's rhetoric has set the tone for a more aggressive U.S. policy. The U.S. now holds Petro personally responsible for the crisis, wielding sanctions as a blunt instrument to force a dramatic policy reversal. American officials insist that only tough measures will compel Colombia to crack down on the drug trade. These sanctions follow a series of escalating steps, cutting millions in aid, decertifying Colombia as a reliable partner in the drug war, and targeting Petro's own son with corruption allegations. Each move has further strained the once close alliance. By sanctioning Petro's family, the U.S. is sending a powerful message of mistrust. Washington accuses the administration of turning a blind eye to corruption, suggesting that the rot goes all the way to the top. The message is unmistakable. Washington now views Colombia's government as compromised and is prepared to use its economic leverage to demand sweeping change, even if it means risking diplomatic fallout. The alliance that once defined U.S.-Latin America relations is now fractured by suspicion, pressure, and blame, leaving the future of cooperation between Washington and Bogotá more uncertain than ever. President Petro has answered U.S. pressure with defiance, calling the sanctions an attack on Colombia's sovereignty. He insists Colombia is no one's colony, framing the U.S. move as modern imperialism. Petro claims his government has seized more cocaine than any before, arguing that focusing only on coca crops is misleading. He blames rising coca cultivation on previous U.S.-backed governments and says the real problem is demand in the U.S. and Europe. Petro's stance has made him a symbol of resistance across Latin America, rallying those wary of U.S. influence. His supporters see him as defending national dignity and rejecting a failed, violent drug war. Petro is betting that national pride will help him weather the economic and political storm. His message: Colombia will chart its own course, even if it stands alone. The conflict has spilled into violence at sea, with U.S. military strikes on suspected drug boats killing dozens. The U.S. claims these were cartel vessels. Colombia says innocent fishermen died, calling the strikes a violation of sovereignty. Petro has accused the U.S. president of murder, fueling outrage at home. Once close naval partners, the two countries now face off in hostile waters. Colombia has demanded respect for its maritime borders, but Washington insists on acting unilaterally. The strikes have left coastal communities in fear, caught between traffickers and foreign firepower. Military cooperation has collapsed, replaced by suspicion and deadly risk. The drug war's new front is chaotic, dangerous, and deeply personal for those living on Colombia's shores. At the heart of the crisis is Petro's total peace policy, a radical shift from decades of U.S.-backed militarization. This policy aims to end the long-standing conflict that has plagued Colombia for over half a century. Petro's approach is a stark departure from the traditional methods of dealing with armed groups and drug cartels. Instead of fighting cartels and guerrillas with force, Petro seeks to negotiate, offering reduced sentences for disarmament. This strategy is designed to bring these groups into the political process and reduce violence through dialogue and compromise. The U.S. sees this as capitulation, arguing it emboldens criminals and fuels record cocaine output. American officials believe that without strict enforcement, the drug trade will only flourish, undermining years of anti-narcotics efforts. Petro counters that 50 years of war and billions in U.S. aid have failed to bring peace or stop the drug trade. He argues that the traditional approach has only led to more violence and instability, without addressing the underlying issues. He believes dialogue and social investment are the only way to address root causes like poverty and state neglect. By improving living conditions and providing opportunities, Petro hopes to create a more stable and peaceful society. The U.S. demands eradication and military pressure. Petro offers negotiation and reform. This fundamental difference in approach has led to a significant rift between the two nations. Sanctions are Washington's rejection of Colombia's experiment, deepening the ideological rift. These measures are intended to pressure Colombia into returning to a more hardline stance against drug trafficking. The two countries now stand on opposite sides of a fundamental debate: war or peace, force or dialogue. This ideological clash reflects broader global tensions about how to handle complex issues like drug trafficking and insurgency. The outcome will shape Colombia's future, and the region's. The stakes are high, and the world is watching to see which path will ultimately lead to lasting peace and stability. The sanctions are the climax of a partnership unraveling for months. Tensions flared after Petro's pro-Palestine protest at the UN, prompting the U.S. to revoke his visa, a rare rebuke. The U.S. then slashed aid and decertified Colombia as a drug war ally. In response, Petro halted U.S. arms purchases, ending generations of military dependence. The pillars of the alliance, military, aid, diplomacy, have collapsed. What was once close cooperation is now open hostility, with both sides trading public accusations. The breakdown has left a power vacuum in Latin America, raising regional instability. The U.S. and Colombia now talk past each other as adversaries, not partners. The future of the region hangs in the balance. In Washington, the political climate demands a tough response to drugs and immigration. Petro, a former guerrilla, is seen as failing to stop the flow of cocaine, an issue weaponized by U.S. politicians. Congresswoman Maria Elvira Salazar and others call Petro a socialist dictator, fueling Cold War-era suspicions. U.S. agencies cite record coca cultivation, blaming Petro's policies for weakening eradication and empowering cartels. Washington dismisses Petro's claims of record seizures, focusing only on coca growth. The U.S. response is driven as much by domestic politics as foreign policy. Sanctions show voters a hard line. The long-term alliance is sacrificed for short-term political gain. The message: the U.S. will punish leaders it sees as threats, no matter the diplomatic cost. From Bogotá, the U.S. sanctions look like punishment for daring to try something new. Petro's government argues the old drug war devastated rural communities and failed to stop cocaine exports. They claim their strategy, intercepting cocaine, not just eradicating crops, is more humane and effective. Petro calls for shared responsibility, urging the U.S. and Europe to address their own demand for drugs. Colombia feels scapegoated for a problem fueled by foreign consumption. After decades of violence and sacrifice, Petro's government wants peace and dignity, not more war. The sanctions are seen as political aggression, not legitimate policy. Colombia pleads for the world to see the crisis from their side. The U.S.-Colombia rift has plunged the country into uncertainty. Sanctions and aid cuts threaten the economy, scaring off investment and squeezing the government budget. Ordinary Colombians will bear the brunt of the crisis, as social programs and rural support dry up. Petro's defiance has inspired some, but the cost is high: isolation and the urgent need for new allies. Colombia may turn to other global powers, reshaping Latin America's geopolitical map. The nation stands at a crossroads, caught between U.S. demands for old strategies and a government determined to try something new. Petro must prove his total peace can deliver real results. The stakes are enormous: sovereignty, dignity, and the hope for lasting peace. How Colombia navigates this storm will echo far beyond its borders.